happy little games. In 1989, the arcade scene was still going strong. The king of the arcades, who was often imitated but never duplicated, Sega was on quite the roll when it came to successful arcade hits. In the mid to late 1980s, they released a number of arcade classics such as Altered Beast, Golden Axe, Thunderblade, Fantasy Zone, and Space Harrier. Sega was always looking for the next big thing, and since robots were still big in Japan, they decided to take a page from a popular US movie and create their next big arcade game. The name of the game was Cyber Police ESWAT, and that is the game we are looking at today. What popular film was this game inspired by? So grab all your weapons and make sure they are on rapid fire, because this is the history of Cyber Police ESWAT. The year is 1989 and Sega is once again looking to create another arcade classic. One of the designers at Sega had seen a certain American film and was infatuated with its concept. The movie in question featured a half-man, half-robot, but all beefcake who appeared by the name of Robocop. This member of law enforcement won our hearts by shooting criminals in the crotch and eating baby food for dinner. Unfortunately for Sega, the license for Robocop was snatched up in the scripting stage by Ocean Software in 1986 for a measly $10,000. Not one to let something like a little copyright infringement stop them, Sega went ahead and designed a game with a similar concept. The gameplay is similar to their previous title Shinobi, in which you have to run and gun to take out multiple enemies and move between the top and bottom areas. Also similar to Shinobi is the ability to crouch walk. The game runs on the System 16 hardware board, which features large, well-animated sprites and excellent sound with plenty of digitized voice samples. Although your character is not half-man, half-robot, he is equipped with an exoskeleton robosuit, which is referred to as ICE, or Individual Combat Equipment. This gives him access to a number of weapons and armor. One thing that is only briefly mentioned in the arcade attract sequence but never utilized in the game is the addition of a karaoke mic into the suit. I guess the plan was for your character to shoot some bad guys and finish the day out by belting out some Elvis live on stage. Although they couldn't use the Robocop license, they attempted to replicate the arcade's gameplay, but instead adding more weapons and simultaneous two-player action. Cyber Police ESWAT was released in the arcades by Sega in 1989. As the story goes, you take on the role of Duke Oda, who was a member of the Liberty City Cyber Police Force. More specifically, the ESWAT unit, or Enhanced Special Weapons and Tactics. Your mission is to target and hunt down the city's most wanted criminals, including dismantling the organization known as I. As I mentioned, the game is a simultaneous two-player run-and-gun shooter which plays very similar to Sega's earlier arcade smash hit Shinobi. The controls are fairly simple, with buttons for shooting, jumping, and your special weapons. The game takes place across 15 levels with a mini-boss at the end of each one. The gameplay reminds me of both Shinobi and Rolling Thunder, in which you can jump between the bottom levels and the top levels with the greatest of ease. Surprisingly though, you don't get your robosuit until the 4th stage. For the first two levels, it's just mild-mannered Officer Alex Murphy, I mean Duke Oda, armed with a single pistol as he tries to make it to the end of the level with the least amount of bullet holes. Your ammunition is limited though, so if you do run out, you have to resort to kicking the enemy. You do have a life bar in which you can take 4 hits before you die. One cool little feature is that your exosuit will actually get damaged with the more damage that you take. After the third stage, you are promoted to ESWAT, in which you are equipped with your powered exoskeleton. Your supersuit is equipped with a fully automatic chain gun, which allows you to hold the fire button down for sustained blasts. The chain gun can be powered up with 3 different super weapons to further aid you in your war on crime. These super weapons do not appear very often, and they have to be caught as they fly across the screen. You will need all the help you can get because the enemies are everywhere and will stop at nothing to put you down. The graphics look pretty good with large sprites and fairly smooth animation. Some of the bosses you encounter are pretty unique, including for some odd reason a giant gorilla. The stages you have to traverse are bank robbery, hostage situation, truck stop, rooftops, derelict building, condemned block, Chinatown, warehouse, rooftops part 2, dockyard, harbor, factory, secret entrance, armory, and Balzar's throne room. Some of the bosses you encounter are Fat Man, Nasty Nick, the Captain, Dirty Duffy, a collapsing building, a tiger, a giant gorilla, a monster truck, laser turrets, black devils, a mini tank, and the final encounter with Balzar. If you are able to successfully defeat Balzar, a short text ending is shown and you are declared a hero. A number of home conversions were produced with US Gold and Creative Materials in charge of the home computer ports, and Sega themselves in charge of the Sega Genesis version. Creative Materials had been in charge of the excellent conversion of Line of Fire, so they were aiming high for these conversions. The first home computer version coming down the pipeline is the Amiga version. The first thing you notice when you boot this bad boy up is that the entire arcade presentation is here, from the opening attract scenes, to the cutscenes, to the ending sequence, and everything in between. The graphics were ripped directly from the arcade board, and despite some washed out colors, they look really good. The sprites are large and fairly detailed, but the problem is with the scrolling. While it's not bad, it's not quite as smooth as it could have been. The in-game music is gone, unfortunately, but we do get a little bit of digitized speech from the arcade game. The controls are a little bit stiff, but not to the point where it's unplayable. You only have one fire button, so it does make things a bit more difficult. The simultaneous 2-player mode has also been included. Sticking with the 16 bits for just a moment, the Atari ST version looks similar to the Amiga but nowhere near as polished. The colors are even more washed out on the Atari ST, and the details are just not there. The full screen scrolling found in the Amiga is also missing, and the scrolling is extremely jerky. The speed of the game has also been reduced, as well as the animation frames. The controls went from a bit stiff on the Amiga to full-on Viagra mode for the Atari ST. Sound effects are merely adequate, with once again having no in-game music. It does have the same arcade presentation, so at least it looks nice. The version most US gamers are familiar with is the Sega Genesis version. This is a different beast entirely when it comes to the arcade game, sharing only a few similarities. The storyline is pretty much the same, with you having to take down the organization of I. The level layout is completely different, and so is the playability to a point. There are a lot more platforming sections in this game, and you also have the use of a jetpack known as the burner, which can get you out of those gnarly situations. It is limited in use, so that is something you will have to be aware of. The only mini-boss to make it over were the Devil Twins, who appear in the second mission. You also get your exosuit at the start of the third mission. There are only 8 missions available as opposed to 15 from the arcade game, but the levels are a lot longer. There are various super weapons available, such as the plasma charge, rocket launcher, and fire, among others. There are various power-ups littered throughout the game, including 1-ups, health bar refill, burner refill for your jetpack, and more. The playability is nice and tight and seems to be more responsive than the actual arcade game itself. The graphics are nice with good detail and some smooth parallax scrolling thrown in as well. The sprites are smaller than the arcade game, but that's okay considering this is more of a platform game than the original. You also have only 3 continues, which isn't enough in my opinion because the game is fairly difficult. If you die, you will lose whatever weapon you were equipped with. Arcade purists will not like this version, but for a standalone title it's pretty fun to play and one you should check out. The good old Commodore 64 version is up next, and a lot of people give this game a lot of grief, but to be fair, some of it is not warranted. The graphics are fairly detailed with decent sized sprites and animation. For some reason your character is now sporting a red shirt instead of blue, which even carries over to his exosuit, which is now also red. The backgrounds are nicely detailed, which are instantly recognizable by any fan of the arcade game. The sound effects aren't bad, but the 64 and its ever so lovable SID chip are capable of so much more. The controls are not bad, but every so often the hitbox will rear its ugly head. Sometimes an enemy bullet will miss you by a fairly good distance and you will still take a hit. Speaking of the enemies, there are not that many appearing on screen with a maximum number of 3. All of the bosses made it over, including the giant barrel-throwing gorilla and monster truck. There are a couple of glitches throughout the game, such as certain enemies having their legs cut off. Overall, it's not a bad conversion and nowhere near as stinky as most people make it out. The Specky version should be commended for at least attempting to replicate the size and detail of the arcade sprites. Everything except for the arcade attract scene and ending sequences are here, including all the enemies and bosses. The 48K version reduces the screen size to a third, while the 128K is almost full screen. It doesn't matter though because the scrolling is still a bit choppy. The speed of the game is decent and similar to the arcade original. The colors are another story with the expected monochrome graphics in full bloom. The colors will change depending on the level, going from urine colored to green to blue, among others. Despite the lack of colors, the sprites stand out from the background so you can at least see what the heck is going on. Once again, this game gets a lot of grief from gamers, but I didn't think it was that bad. If you were to look at screenshots of the Amstrad version in a typical European game magazine back in the day, you would have ran out, plopped your money down, and purchased a copy with no questions asked. It was only after the game booted up would the disappointment overwhelm you like a fart in an astronaut suit. The graphics look fantastic, especially for the system. However, when the game starts to move, it looks like a 1980s era Soviet Union cartoon. The animation is extremely choppy and the scrolling is absolutely ridiculous. The speed is atrocious, with your character looking as if he recently found anti-gravity boots. A lot of the little details from the arcade game are carried over though, such as the cop car pulling up to the scene at the start of each level. There are basically no sound effects to speak of, with the occasional queasy queefs for your enjoyment. The controls are sluggish, which, considering how choppy the scrolling is and the horrendous speed, this is to be expected. It is unfortunate because the graphics look great, but once it starts to move, it falls apart like a drag queen at 3 a.m. Or so I'm told. And last, but certainly not least, is the Sega Master System version. Similar to its 16-bit big brother, except for the two opening stages which sort of resemble the arcade original. Instead of 8 missions in the Sega Genesis version or the 15 missions found in the arcade game, you are limited to only 5 in the Master System version. The sprites look nice, but everything has been shrunk down to probably half the size of the arcade game. The gameplay is extremely fast and the enemies are on you like stank on a hillbilly. This was definitely one of the hardest Master System games I've played in quite some time. The power-ups have also been changed to regular bullets, a heat charge, wide-angle spray, and laser beams. The music isn't too bad, with a catchy little tune that makes shooting all the nefarious criminals that much more pleasing. The game is fun to play, but it barely resembles the Sega Genesis version, let alone the arcade game. The Sega Genesis version was also included on Sonic's Ultimate Genesis Collection for the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360. It was also released for the Sega Genesis Classic Collection Gold Edition for the Nintendo Wii and Windows. Let's make no bones about it, ESWAT tries its best to be Robocop without actually being Robocop. There is no denying where the influence of this game came from, and in the 80s and 90s, copyright laws were much more lenient in Japan. ESWAT is a middle-of-the-road type game where it's fun to play in short bursts, but it does get repetitive rather quickly. The levels are short, but with 15 to blast your way through, it does tend to hold your interest a bit longer than usual. The first 3 levels, where you don't even have your exosuit, can be a bit tedious, but once you power up, so does the fun factor. If you've never had a chance to pretend to be Duke Oda, who was pretending to be Alex Murphy, be sure and give this game a shot. You'll be glad you did. If you like this video, be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Also, if you would like to support me on Patreon, be sure and click the link below. Thanks everybody for watching.